Arizona connections here, wrongfully convicted you and sentenced you to death for killing your 4-year-old son. And that has to have been a double trauma. So you've just learned that your son has been murdered, and now you've learned that you've been arrested. You're a suspect. That sounds terrifying. And we know from the research that Cornell has done and the other research we've done is that police and prosecutors often target women, especially in death penalty cases, but generally in criminal legal systems, by characterizing them as, and this is from that 2018 report I mentioned, a bad mother, a bad wife, or a bad woman. And that issue, what makes a bad woman, you know, the slut, the Jezebel, think women were not conforming to gender norms. The main basis for your conviction, really the only basis for your conviction, was a corrupt police officer who interviewed you for 30 minutes and said that he got a confession out of you. And he lied. And that's pretty clear that he had a track record of lying. So with that background, can you talk about how the state of Arizona's case against you and the trial itself illustrate the barriers that women face when they're charged with capital crimes, how it makes it difficult for you to access justice as a woman, especially when the state is eager to paint you as a bad mother or a bad woman, to try to get the death penalty?
I know, at the time that this happened, I was only 25 years old, very naive, because I'd never been in trouble, never been through the system. The only thing I knew about the justice system is what I learned in school, but in practice, it's completely different. And also at the time, I had no idea why this was happening. Like, what did I do? I knew I didn't participate in a crime at all against my son, Christopher. But why was I being dragged in the courts? Why did the police officer lie? Like, I just didn't know. And then living through this and learning how politics plays a part in the justice system, which it shouldn't, but it does. And then going through the appellate process and gathering information about the detective and learning about him, then things started to make sense, you know. So I experienced what the cop was a misogynist, you know. I don't know, he just is. He was at the time. And like Amy said, he claims I confessed, but I didn't. And I remember during the interrogation, he says I did this, but I didn't do this. I found out later that he said this, but he said I was trying to flirt my way out of trouble with him because it was just the two of us in the room. He kicked everybody else out of the room. And he said that he said this at my trial, and it was just, I was so shocked and mortified that he would even say this, but you know, he said I was trying to flirt my way out of trouble, that I exposed my breast to him, that I was fake crying, and you know, trying to come on to him, which it makes me want to just throw up just thinking about it, because it's not true. And then I later learned that when he was a police officer, he would pull over female motorists, and if, you know, and more or less say, you know, I won't write you a ticket if we could go around the corner and, you know, have sex. After he retired from being a police detective, he became a constable, which is, it's kind of in law enforcement, where he could offer or do eviction notices. And after I won my case and was free, I met a woman. She came to my court hearing. I met her, and she told me that the detective served her an eviction notice, and she was so desperate not to lose her house because she had small children. And he said to her, well, we could go in the bedroom and, you know, do this. And sadly, she complied just so she wouldn't lose her place to live. And I just felt sick to even visualize this, and just knowing what kind of a person he was and did this to women. And those were a couple examples. And then, then we had in prison male officers who were crude, especially, I was telling Amy yesterday, women need pads or tampons every month, and we were not allowed to stockpile that stuff. And so you had no choice but to ask the officers for pads or tampons. And I learned quickly never to ask a male officer for that, because they taunt you with it. How bad do you need it? And I remember one officer told me, just flip it around and use the other side, and that made me so angry. And I just yelled at him, you probably make your wife do that, but I don't do that, and I need new pads, So I learned early on, never ask a male officer for things like that.
And just to highlight this previous incident and the reason, like the legal reason that Deborah's case was overturned, is in the United States, the prosecution has an affirmative obligation to hand over any potentially incriminating impeachment evidence about the prosecution's own witnesses. They don't even have to ask for it, they're required to turn it over. And this police officer, who, it wasn't just random chance that he was the one to interrogate Deborah, it was his day off. They called him in special to come in and do this interrogation, because they knew what his tactics were. He's like, yeah, they told me to record it. I don't do recordings. That breaks my style. That cramps my style. I don't record my interrogations. They knew what he was doing, and they did it very deliberately, and then they didn't hand over this incriminating evidence. And this was in 1989, mind you. The thing from his file that they ultimately handed over was from 1971, 1973, that he had been suspended for 5 days for doing exactly what Deborah explained. Pulled over a female motorist and basically solicited sex from her in order to make the ticket go away. That had happened in 1971. He was suspended for 5 days. They didn't turn over that evidence. But of course, when the trial is entirely he said, she said, it was entirely Deborah, and Deborah testified, right? Like, it's really unusual that you have a defendant testify. It's her word against his, and he's a repeat player in the criminal legal system. His word against hers, and he was, in his 40s at the time?
Yeah, I was just 25, and he was in his 40s at the time. And at the time, 25, and just somebody saying that I was, some man in his 40s saying I was sexually interested in him, it was like, no, that's gross. Like, he was too old, just, that's disgusting. Yeah. But, yeah, and he also has a son who's in law enforcement, and his son, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. His son, I don't know all the details, I've just been told this, but his son is even on a Brady list now. So
Brady is the legal requirement in the United States that you're required to turn over evidence to the defense that's in your possession, including, like, if it's the police officer testifying, you have to turn over anything incriminating about whether that police officer has lied under oath, which this guy had. They subsequently discovered that he didn't honor defendant's right to remain silent and continued to interrogate them. That's also against the law in the United States. They didn't turn over all of this evidence that would have completely undermined the state's case. That's the Brady obligation. And so, again, apple doesn't fall far from the tree. These police officers have a history of doing this, but think of how gendered it was at trial. And Deborah is an example of a woman who is innocent. But this, of course, happens as well with women who have committed crimes, who come into conflict with the law. That this is the modus operandi in a lot of criminal legal systems. How are you going to characterize a woman? They're not going to do that with a man. No. They're characterizing a woman defendant based on this sexism and gendered perspective.
I know the prosecutor, I testified most of the time, well, the defense doesn't have to put on a case. But I wanted to testify because this man was up there lying about me, and I wanted the jury to hear me, because they were assassinating my character. And I remember the prosecutor asked me, so when you were in high school, did you take drama classes? And I said, no. And he said, well, you seem to be a pretty good actress.
Oh my God.
It was just one hit after the other. I wasn't prepared for this. You go into court and you think, let's get to the truth. What happened? Where's your evidence? That's what I was thinking, but it was not like that. It was really just attacking me and my character. And then what made it more complicated and frustrating was I had a female judge, and I would kind of look at her like, help me out here, but she was a former prosecutor, so she sided with the state. It just felt like everything was stacked up against me from the very beginning, and it was an experience that I would wish on anyone. It was terrible.
And the judge got the law horribly wrong. Even though Deborah's attorneys didn't need to, they filed a request for all of the information, all of the incriminating evidence, because they don't have to do that, but they did that. And the judge didn't allow it.
She denied it.
She said, I don't know how that's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So that came up on appeal as well. But, you brought up the issue of judges, and the judge who wrote the opinion that ultimately led to Deborah's exoneration himself had to resign. He had been the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit, Alex Kaczynski, you may have heard of him. He had to resign after 20 different women who had clerked for him came forward with allegations that he himself had engaged in sexual assault and creating a sexually hostile work environment for his law clerks. But because he resigned, the courts no longer have jurisdiction over him to hold him accountable. He's now practicing law in front of the Ninth Circuit. So even when judges get it right, it shows you how the criminal legal system can just be permeated with gender discrimination and toxic masculinity, I think you could say. Brenda, you and Sabrina Butler-Smith, who spoke at our event last week, are the only two women who have been formally exonerated from death row in the United States since the 1970s. But you're part of this larger community at Witness to Innocence of people who have been exonerated from death row here in the United States. Is there anything that stands out for you and or Sabrina in terms of your path to reintegration into society, things that you're facing that are different from the guys at Witness to Innocence?
Well, the common thing between Sabrina and I, other than being women, is both of our cases involved our children. So Sabrina's child died of a medical issue, but she was accused of murdering her baby. And my son was murdered, and I was accused of participating in the crime. So that's what's similar between the two of us, is that our children were the victims of a crime. Witness to Innocence, there's a lot of exonerees, and Sabrina and I are the only women. The rest are men. And what we see with the men is the men are accused of, or were accused of, killing strangers, not family members. So that's the difference.
Yeah. And I want you to talk a little bit more about Witness to Innocence, because I'm sure you've all been to events here at the CSW where women speak who have lived experience, and we really want to honor your expertise having lived through the trauma. But we also don't want to tokenize it. We don't want to bring you out and say, okay, now tell us your story and re-traumatize yourself and bring us all to tears. We want you to be in partnership with us in the cause of fighting for abolition of the death penalty and the cause of expanding access to justice for women. What are some good practices that Witness to Innocence uses in that regard? How does Witness to, and how can we learn from the Witness to Innocence model?
So when I got out in 2013, I was invited to join Witness to Innocence, and at first I said no, thank you, because I knew there were other death row exonerees. We call ourselves death row survivors, and I knew there were others, but honestly, I thought it would be like people who have alcohol issues go to AA. I thought it was we all sit in a circle and talk about what happened to us, and I didn't want to do that. So anyway, they said, okay, well, it's not like that, but when you feel ready, we're here for you. And then I started therapy, and my therapist said to me, if you go speak out, it'll be helpful to you therapeutically. And I just could not picture that, because I said, who cares what happened to me personally? Who would be interested in listening to this? And then I got back in touch with Witness to Innocence, and I said, okay, they invited me to one of their annual gatherings, and I said, okay, I'll go and meet people. And so I did. In 2015, I met other exonerees, and it was amazing that there were other people that experienced the same thing I did. And then that's when I met Sabrina. And I didn't feel so alone, because when this happened to me, I thought I was the only one this happened to. Like, who convicts an innocent person and puts them to death? So I was really shocked to see that there were others like me. And then I realized, no, we don't sit around in a circle and talk to each other about what we do share our stories, but it's not what I thought it would be. And so Witness to Innocence reaches out and talks to organizations and schools, police organizations, I mean, everything, churches, everything, to let people know we share our stories, that this could happen to anybody. You don't have to be a criminal, a lifelong criminal, to get into the justice system. So, and so then I've been speaking since 2016, and my therapist was right. It is very therapeutic. It is.
And Witness to Innocence is created by and run by
Yes.
people who are exonerated.
Yes,
right?
it was created by Ray Crone and Sister Helen. And Ray Crone is an exoneree from Arizona, and Ray Crone and I had the same prosecutor.
Yeah.
So, after I won my appeal, Ray reached out to me, and then yes, now it's run by exonerees. Our executive director is an exoneree. I'm on the staff. Sabrina's on the staff. So, yeah.
And employment is a really important piece to the reintegration part.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize in the United States, if you serve your term and are released, you get some supervision from the justice system for a few years. You get assistance with housing, employment, all these things to help people get back on their feet. What do you get if you're exonerated?
Nothing. It's like they open the door, you're free to go, and then you're on your own. I mean, really nothing. I was very, very fortunate. I had a great support system, so I had a place to live. My lawyer offered me a job at his law firm so I could learn how to, it wasn't right away. So when I first got out, where I was living, I isolated, because that's all I knew. I didn't go out. And if I did go out, it was very short little trips, and then I'd go back to the house. My house became my prison. And I spent my time with flowers. I was, did gardening and stuff. But then my lawyers noticed that I was isolating, and then he offered me a job, and I said, Mike, I don't have any legal skills. He said, oh, yes, you do. Because I was learning law, not like lawyers go to law school, but I mean, I was reading up on it to learn how to understand briefs and how to help my attorneys help me. So, yeah, so he hired me and I worked for him for 6 years until COVID. And then I got a job at Witnessed Innocence. So I was very lucky. Not many exonerees are that lucky, you know. And it's just like some exonerees get compensated and get millions of dollars and others get nothing. So.
Thanks. Deborah, we're gonna shift and talk to
Sure.
Chelsea now.